Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. Today, prepare yourself for another edition of Q&A with the coach. One of the most popular questions that I have been receiving lately is this. Ramsey, what do you think of the upcoming boxing match between KSI and Logan Paul? Now, I will be the first to admit I had no idea who either of these guys were. I really didn't. I had never seen them suggested in my suggested videos on YouTube, never seen a thumbnail from either of them, in spite of being on YouTube for over 12 years. YouTube, what's up with that? Why aren't you telling me who the famous people are? I mean, just a few weeks ago I found out that this dude called PewDiePie exists, and apparently he's one of the most famous YouTubers of all time, and I had no clue. So, yeah, there's a lot of drama surrounding this upcoming fight, and I'm not interested in drama at all. I don't care about drama. I care about fights. I care about technique. I care about coaching people to win fights. So I tried to look at this from a technical standpoint. Now, this fellow KSI, I saw that he had already done an amateur boxing match, and this was an extremely high-profile boxing match, hyped up more, dressed up with more song and dance than many professional fights that I've seen. And what was fascinating about this to me was that this was an amateur boxing match that generated a ton of revenue for the guy. Let me repeat that. Essentially, he got paid for an amateur fight, and that is mind-boggling, because amateur means you don't get paid for it. Now, there was no fight purse as far as I'm aware. There should not have been. But from the YouTube videos released, which got tens of millions of views, yeah, that generated a bunch of revenue. So it's a very strange and interesting gray area right here that famous YouTubers have the potential to put themselves in, essentially becoming professional amateurs in combat sports. Man, combat sports, it's a weird thing because it's one of the few professions where people who don't know anything about it, where people who don't know anything about fighting, who absolutely suck at it, if they are famous enough, if they have enough notoriety, they can get the attention of some promoter or whatever and get permission to get in there in the ring or the cage and scrap and suck at it and still make a ton of money off of it. It's a weird, weird thing. I made a whole video about this. Somebody asked me, Ramsey, what do you think about all these fake fighters in the UFC like CM Punk? And part of me is kind of mad about that. Like, that upsets me as a professional because I know lots of guys who work really hard to try to get in the UFC, and they may never get there in spite of their amazing talents because it's so competitive. But if you have enough fame or infamy or whatever, and a big enough following to sell enough tickets, to sell enough pay-per-views, well, the UFC has shown in recent times they are willing to do that. They are willing to compromise. So this is an interesting fight for that reason, because it means that not necessarily these two, but definitely in the future, famous YouTubers will probably end up in the UFC, making their amateur/professional debuts. And that is weird to me. That is really weird to me. If this fight generates enough money, which it probably will, I mean, it already has, all these videos both of these gentlemen have made preceding this fight, their press conferences, their training montages, their vlogs about it, have received so many millions of views and generated so much revenue. I mean, man, other famous YouTubers would be remiss not to do the same thing. I mean, what are we going to see next? Master Wong versus Nick Drosos in a battle of self-defense? I don't know, man. I don't know. Somebody asked me, what do I think of Nick Drosos? And that's another guy I didn't know existed. And so I had to look the guy up, and apparently he's one of these internet self-defense gurus. And I don't know, I didn't spend a lot of time watching his videos because it didn't interest me that much. So not a lot of comment there. If you have a specific question about a specific video or a specific technique you'd like me to review, leave a link in the comments down below, and yeah, I'll take a look at it. So back to KSI and Logan Paul. So Logan Paul, to my knowledge, has not had a boxing match, although he does have an amateur wrestling career behind him. I don't know if he wrestled in high school or college or both, but he does have an amateur wrestling career, and I did see some of the footage of his wrestling, and he was actually pretty decent at it. So that's kind of a big deal, because even though wrestling and boxing are two dramatically different combat sports, the thing is, if you have a lot of amateur combat sport experience, even if it's a completely different one, fighting, competing in front of a crowd, in front of people, already experiencing that combat stress, that is a huge advantage over the guy who has less of that. Now, KSI did have that one amateur boxing match, and I took a look at it, and it was a really interesting match for one particular reason. And that was, I thought that KSI did a fantastic job of regulating his energy expenditure, which is usually the opposite of what amateurs do in their first boxing match. Usually, in the first 30 seconds, they blow their whole wad, they swing for the fences, they try to put 10,000% power into everything, and then 30 seconds later, they're done. Now, I'm not saying this was a great boxing match by any stretch of the imagination. No, it wasn't. It was an amateur match between two first-time fighters. But that aspect of it, I thought he carried himself really well. He paced himself really well. And again, that's something amateurs don't usually do. The first round, again, it was mostly about distance and establishing his jab, and he wasn't really putting a lot of pepper on the shots. But as his opponent, I don't remember his opponent's name. I guess he was another famous YouTuber. Again, YouTube, what's up with not telling me who the famous people are? Honestly, I don't care. But, yeah, when he saw his opponent was wearing down in the final round, then he started putting some power behind the shots and scored a technical knockout. So in that respect, it was a fantastic first amateur boxing match. And I've seen so many first amateur boxing matches. Yeah, it's almost predictable what people are going to do because human nature mandates that we do it. So, yeah, maybe there's something about being on YouTube, about putting yourself in front of the world that helps you channel that stress of being in front of people in combat sports. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there is some crossover. Maybe not. But, yeah, this is definitely a guy who is used to performing in front of a crowd. And that is something that carried through into his boxing match. So, do I have any predictions about this match? Some people have asked me. I really don't know. I didn't see any sparring footage from Logan Paul. The training videos I saw of him, he did look very stiff and very tight. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's pretty normal for grapplers who transition to striking, because striking is a very resistant movement quality, and grappling is a very indulgent movement quality. It's like dancing, like a modern dancer. You know, that dance style where you can roll on the ground and do all kinds of crazy stuff and flip around and get really loose. Indulgent. You indulge into gravity. It's like one of those guys transitioning to classical ballet where you have to lift yourself up and present the illusion that you are floating by flexing every muscle in your body. Likewise, a lot of strikers have a difficult time transitioning to grappling because it is so indulgent, so they get really tense for the opposite reason. So they both look like they're fairly athletic guys. I mean, it's not a contest of combat sports between people who are completely hopeless, obviously, so they're probably going to put on a little bit of a show. It won't be a great one. I mean, it's going to be an amateur boxing match. This reminds me a little bit of this guy I know of here in Shanghai who runs a gym. It's a boxing gym. And every year they have put on what they call a white-collar boxing charity event. And here's the thing. They get these guys who don't know anything about boxing, but they have them watch this show. This show where these terrible boxers, again, first-time boxers, don't know anything about boxing. Supposedly they're white-collar workers, office workers, whatever. And they get into the ring at this black tie style event where people dress up all nice and sit at fancy tables and eat a fancy dinner and watch this boxing match that's dressed up really nicely. And they put on like 6 or 7 fights. And the people watching, they see these terrible fights because they're first-time fighters who don't know what they're doing. And they think, I could do that. I could beat that guy. Where do I sign up for this? And so they go and they sign up for it. And the process perpetuates itself. And the dude who set this up, he had this ingenious idea, which is in order to compete in this white-collar event, you have to sign up for a yearly membership at his gym. And so basically he's getting these people to sign up to fight for free, but not just that, to pay him for the privilege. Now, the proceeds of the fight event go to charity, but the proceeds of the gym memberships go straight to him. So it's a win-win for this guy. And props to him for his business acumen there. Now, back to Logan Paul and KSI. Again, I think not necessarily these two, but guys like this are probably going to be fighting in the UFC in the next few years. YouTubers, yes, YouTubers who don't know anything about MMA are going to be fighting in the UFC in the next few years. If their following is big enough, if they can generate enough views, I am absolutely certain that Dana White will allow it. I mean, there was the whole CM Punk debacle. Twice. So who's to say that if Logan Paul and KSI generate enough revenue doing this boxing match that, well, Dana White wouldn't start seeing bigger dollar signs in his eyes than he usually has, and he'd be like, let me give these guys a contract so I can get some of that sweet, sweet YouTube revenue. It's going to happen. Not necessarily with them, but with somebody. Man, tell me in the comments down below, what famous YouTubers would you like to see fight in the UFC? Now, I personally wouldn't like to see any of them fight in the UFC. I want to see the best fighters in the world fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The Ultimate Fighting Championship is supposed to be a contest of who is the best fighter on planet Earth. I mean, it's not the Ultimate Fame Championship. That's not what UFC stands for, but it's definitely going in that direction. And that makes me a little sad. Sometimes a lot sad. But if we're going in that direction anyway, who would you like to see, YouTube celebrity or other celebrity, fighting in the UFC cage in the Ultimate Fame Championship? It's inevitable, guys. It is inevitable. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.